Welcome to the Global Conversations webcast, where the world meets on issues of equity and inclusion in organizational culture. Here are your hosts, Andre Darmanin and Priya Rateja.
Good afternoon and good morning to everyone here. The purpose of these webcasts is, it's a Global Conversations webcast, is to dive deeper into trends and issues facing equity practitioners, particularly pertaining to organizational cultures from global and local perspectives. For today's webcast, our guests Luz Gonzalez, Janine Ting-Jansen, and Marsha Ramroop will be having a conversation about emotional and cultural intelligence, the similarities, the differences, and these concepts, which are simply about establishing basic human rights for employees. So without further ado, I just want to transfer over to Priya, where we're going to talk about, well, she's going to just give a land acknowledgement and then go into introductions of everyone here. So Priya, go ahead.
Thank you, Andre. We're acknowledging that we are meeting on Aboriginal land that has been inhabited by Indigenous peoples from the beginning. As settlers, we're grateful for the opportunity to meet here, and we thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. As we gather here today, there have been Aboriginal peoples who have been the stewards of this place. In particular, we acknowledge the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. We recognize and deeply appreciate their historic connection to this place. I also recognize the contributions of Métis, Inuit, and other Indigenous peoples have made both in shaping and strengthening this community, in particular in our province and country as a whole. As settlers, this recognition of the contributions and historic importance of Indigenous peoples must also be clearly and overtly connected to our collective commitment to make the promise and the challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our communities, and in particular to bring justice for murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls across our country.
Thank you for that poignant introduction to our Indigenous peoples here in Canada and throughout the world. So first, I want to start off our conversation with our introductions of our guests. So without further ado, Marsha, start us off by telling us about yourself, your work, and your purpose of why you started Unheard Voice Consultancy.
Well, thank you so much. It's great to be here. I joined you from the Midlands in the UK, Derby, Derbyshire, the land of Pride and Prejudice, if you have seen that. And why am I in inclusion work? Really good question, because I had a 30-year career in broadcasting before I went full pelt into sort of full-time inclusion work, if you like. And I'd been for a job interview, which I didn't get. And I had impressed one of the panelists, and he asked to meet me for a coffee. And I thought, yeah, okay, great, could lead to something else. So I went for this coffee with this editor. And I was trying to explain to him how I thought it was really important that when we were doing our journalism, when we were trying to run our radio stations and produce our news, that we went into communities and really listened to those voices, to those communities. Everyone has to pay their BBC licence fee in the UK. So why aren't we properly representing them? Why aren't we really listening to their stories the way they went on told? And I said to him really passionately, I said, we need to give the unheard voice a place to speak. And he said, that's a really good line. And I said, that it's not a line, it's what I believe. But having articulated it in that way, I realized that actually that's what I had always believed and what I'd always worked on. And what I'd always tried to bring is this idea that what certain individuals in newsrooms decided was the news. It wasn't necessarily the news for everybody. What was important to different people in different perspectives as really, really crucial. So I started to develop lots of different things, including work around cultural intelligence, and try to bring that into inclusive reporting and how we approached our audiences. And then found that my expertise was required outside of that organization. So I started my little side hustle, Unheard Voice, 5 years ago. And with, it was really clear I was always going to call it Unheard Voice as soon as someone said to me, oh, if you set up on your own, I'll hire you. And the tagline, there it is, giving the unheard voice a place to speak, up above my left shoulder. And yeah, so that's what I do. And I went into the built environment sector very particularly because I really felt that if I could influence the creation of inclusive spaces, I could influence the creation of inclusive society. So the built environment and engineering are really fundamental to how we interact with each other. So I really sort of were concentrating on those two sectors in order to bring about the change we all want to see. And I could take up the whole podcast just talking about me, but I realize there are a couple of other people here as well.
No, that's great. I mean, the thing is, what I would be remiss to say is, a couple of things is, having my initial background in urban planning, that's where we kind of have that connection in that perspective in terms of built environments, and now both of us moving into this space. And of course, without mention here is about the Trinidadian part.
I was going to say, right? Together we aspire, together we achieve.
I'm surprised you don't have the flag behind you because Carnival just happened, but anyway, I digress here. So we can go on about that. So now, I'm gonna turn it over to Janine. Now, Janine and I have just known each other for a little less than a year, but I mean, a lot of our conversations have centered around. Initially, it was around ESG work, and then she contacted me. She was like, you know what, I want to do something a little different, and this is the topic. We were talking about cultural intelligence, emotional intelligence. So, I'm great to have you here, Janine, and tell everyone about yourself too.
Thank you, Andre, and it's a pleasure to be here with Marsha, Luz, and Priya. Marsha, I love your story about a coffee turning into the next best thing that you just leaned into. It's a wonderful story to share. For me, I like to use the phrase unapologetically ambicultural, and I use that word as an American-born third gen here in America, because I identify fully as being Mexican and Chinese. Both my parents have Mexican and Chinese heritage, both of them. And there's a really fascinating thing that happens to me when I meet people, because they ask where I'm from. I say I'm from New York, and we go down this rabbit hole, and it turns into this really curious of how can your parents be both, and oh, your grandparents are both. So when I navigate through this, it becomes this well, why is this important and relevant? I see Marsha laughing, to the conversation. And this happens to me a lot. But turning that into the story of me going to college, the first to go to college in my family, getting my master's. I actually did my master's, one of my papers on the Trinidadian story. So a time for another day on that, because we did the reverse minority conversation about what that looks like. And we actually went there in person and did the study, and it was really fascinating from a disparities perspective of what that looks like. So that's me in my master's program. But it evolved to me to landing in law firms and finance and now pharmaceuticals, navigating the diversity space as both an HR professional, diversity manager, and now being a global lead for diversity at a company. So all of those things come into play with the lived experience I have. So leading to this conversation, I think it's really important to acknowledge where people are. And it's really difficult to do so without having some kind of baseline. And I think CQ, EQ, these assessments that we look at, they help begin the conversation. They're not the solution, but they get us started in a place where we can all see where we are, where we are meeting each other, and going from there. So that's where I like to focus this work, and really being honest about learning about other cultures that are not my own, where my experience is unique to myself. I'm also a mom of 3 kids, and having to really coach them and guide them through life as someone who looks different, right? That's my next wonderful goal in my life. So pulling all that together to say that this is something there, it's just constant in my life from both an academic and professional and personal piece. And however I can share that conversation to really advance allyship in this space, understanding and changing lived experiences. That's what I'm here for. So thanks, Andre, for inviting me. Looking forward to digging deeper into this.
Thanks for this, Janine. And I didn't even know that part about your master's paper. So now that we have this connection here,
Andre
Luz
was
kind of
just too
left out
busy
here.
sharing.
Although,
I didn't know that.
although there's that connection of the East Coast over here, where Luz is from New Jersey. So, and Luz and I have gone back. It's almost a year since that course that we both took. EDI or DEI in the workplace course, and with Diakana, and then we've remained friends ever since, just talking about our work and whatnot. So just tell everyone about yourself and etc. And same thing goes for you.
Thank you, Andre, and thank you so much. It's so great to be in this group with all of you and hear more information. So one of the things that interested me was throughout the majority of my life, I was always filling gaps. What do you need? I got it. What do you need? I got it. But I never really felt like I belonged. I felt like I had to include myself and then transform and adapt who I was to merge with whatever society, microcosm I was in, microculture. Until I went through a series of hardships, a breakup, heartbreak, my child got sick, just one after the other. And I heard this beautiful comment by this renowned author, Gary Zukav. He said, if you hurt and hurt and hurt, and love and love and love, it's not love you're feeling, it's actually fear, because love does not hurt. And that blew my mind, because I'm Latina, and Latinas were passionate, and love is like, I'll die for you. I love you. I'm going to kill for you. And I was like, wait a minute, if I love and love and love, and I hurt and I hurt and I hurt, that's not love. What does that mean? So I dove deeper, and I started finding out we're always looking for external sources to help us, guide us, but we're missing out on the most valuable piece of information, which is our internal body processing system. Our body is communicating with us. When you feel a lump in your throat, check it out. What are the thoughts covered beneath that? If you're feeling an elephant on your chest, what's going on? And then we're creating decisions from these unconscious thoughts. So I was like blown out of my mind. I went into one of these groups, and it was like I finally found my tribe. These people speak my language. It wasn't about trigger proofing the environment. It was about recognizing the triggers from within. So how do you do that? Then I dove deeply into emotional awareness, emotional intelligence, cultural awareness, all of these things to try to learn more about myself and how through my filters, I was experiencing the world, and I was removing myself from my power. So with that, I went back to college, and then I realized I could coach women. I started coaching women in 2016, and I've been very attracted to entrepreneurs, that entity of individual who is a risk taker, but a risk taker with, boundaries, because you have to make money. And then I started my own business called EQ Refined, because I realized professors are putting people into teams, organizations are putting people into teams, but people don't know their own intrinsic self. They don't know their strengths. They don't know their weaknesses. There's that introvert that doesn't know how to participate. There's that alpha energy that is like domineering. There's groupthink. And every team, every group of people has this. Now, if we all know how to start learning our own self, our own needs, or how we read our unconscious biases, then how can we contribute with a new sense of integrity, with a new sense of intention, and moving forward without blame or victimization? So that's where my strive is to go towards. I go to organizations, I give trainings, keynote speaking on emotional intelligence, on inclusive language, on leadership. And I've been very excited because this is all about belonging and inclusion.
Oh, that was a great story to hear, actually, from all of you. All your stories were great, and talking about your experiences throughout your career was, and what influenced you to get into the careers that you have now are inspirational, and something that our listeners and those watching could take note of. So let's start the conversation. I mean, look, we talked about belonging and unconscious bias and whatnot, and what I'm hearing from initially is this introspection aspect of it, and I find that more with emotional intelligence, something that Daniel Goleman had talked about in his book and whatnot, and yet we find that there's differences and similarities with cultural intelligence and emotional intelligence. And I'm actually just what I call myself as a student of cultural intelligence. So, Luz, I just want to start off with you in terms of, is this a starting point looking, because it sounds like you look inside yourself first before you look outwards to that, to have that conversation more globally, understanding people's cultures when it comes to cultural intelligence. I might be totally wrong on this, but I think that's what I'm getting from your starting point.
Yes, totally. It all starts from within. We've lived in a culture where everything is external. The way I'm feeling is based on what someone said, based on how the day is going. But if you go internally, you start looking on how can I reshape this? If you look at the definitions of growth mindset, of curiosity, all of that has a root foundation in internal search, supporting yourself, equilibrium from within. I have a very simple analogy. When I'm at the dentist and they're doing something in there that I'm like not happy with, I realize I stop breathing. And I learned this in yoga. When you want to connect your body, mind, and your spirit, it's about flow, it's about breath. And that's all internal. So when this dentist is in my mouth and I'm like, ow, pain, I realize I'm not in my breath. So when I become in my breath, I had to first realize it. And then when I'm in my breath, I don't feel the pain like before, because now my focus is on breath. So how is it if we could focus an equilibrium and bring equilibrium into ourselves first by focusing on breath? And I want to bring up a McKinsey study that talked about the 5 levels of awareness. It's called they called it dual awareness, external and internal. But it really breaks down awareness into 5 different levels. In the very first level, I was talking to a colleague. She's like, where am I? I said, you're on the first level. You're unaware. If you can't hold breath for 2 minutes, then what else are you living reactively? Where else are you putting out fires in your life? So yeah, in my opinion, it starts with self-assessment.
And Marsha, your thoughts, especially given the fact that we talk about those internal factors, and is this a starting point, like I said, of looking at us as professionals working in this space, or is there something more that we should be adding to this?
No, I absolutely agree that it starts with self. And the thing about what I say about cultural intelligence is that the language of cultural intelligence is not confrontational, but the level of introspection required can be uncomfortable. And it is about introspection because being inclusive behaviors, it's not about other people and their characteristics. It's about yourself, your team, your organization, and its behaviors. And so needing to hold up the mirror and do that piece of introspection is absolutely crucial. It's where it starts. It's about, what can I do? What is it about me that needs to change, so I can be more inclusive of you, whoever you are, because identities are multifaceted. It's funny listening to Janine there talking about her Chinese Mexican background, and I was smiling and laughing because she was saying how people say, well, how does that happen? And so, well, when a mummy and a daddy love each other very much, then that's what happens. You a child, whatever their background is. But when it comes down to that introspection piece of, who is it about me and the cultural intelligence, that is ultimately what the question is. How can we work and relate effectively with others? Who am I? What do I identify as my beliefs, values, perspectives? What is my background? And when I understand where I'm coming from, I can then appreciate the gap that may exist between me and those and others who may have a different background, perspective, value, and understanding that what's acceptable and familiar to me may not be acceptable and familiar to you. That doesn't mean that either of us are necessarily right or wrong. It's just a different perspective. And understanding what that different perspective is does take some work, because it can feel wrong. I believe this and you believe that, and how can the twain meet, right? So I like to use the analogy of a coin, where when it comes to different perspectives and doing that introspective piece of work, when you look at a coin sort of face on, it's like you can see a circle, but when you look at its side on, it's a line. And I could be saying circle and they could be saying line, but if you just take the smallest of shifts, you realize actually you can be looking at the same thing. So it's trying to find those points where you are looking at the same thing, so you can have that conversation. But it starts from, who am I? What do I believe? How do I feel? What are my emotions? What are my backgrounds? How does that influence who I am? And so there is a huge piece of self-awareness there. But the cultural intelligence piece is recognizing that when other people feel or act differently, it isn't just about your emotions. There could be a different layer of understanding around how that's interpreted and how that's played out that is answerable through culture.
And Janine, anything to add to that? I mean, you've touched upon it. Well, we've touched upon it a lot here, but I'm sure there's a lot you can add to this.
I love Luz and Marsha's approach with this, right? Because there's so many different ways to really share how we go down this path. And I think one of the common pieces that's showing up is what I like to focus on is self-confidence, right? To have the self-confidence to share your uniqueness in the workplace. And part of that is really exploring with yourself what you're willing to share, right? Because when you can look yourself in the mirror, explore what you're willing to share, you're really signaling to others how you would like to be treated, right? Because we want to make sure we're moving away from treating everyone the same, right? Treating how you would like to be treated. It's how the person in front of you wants to be treated. And the only way we can do that is to really understand that person, embrace the uniqueness of who they are, and really walk in their lived experience and kind of try that on to walk next to them. Right. So the self-confidence for yourself, having bravery to learn about things you don't know about, having courage to learn about things, that's where we all evolve, because our lived experience is unique and it's not something to be shied away from. But we're taught to assimilate, we're taught to really adapt, to go along, to get along, to really just be in commonality with one another. The fact that we could all be parents, right? The fact that we can all live within a certain range of a hometown. And we're like, wow, we have this in common. And then we land there. But really getting away from that to, wow, this is how I'm different, and explaining to people your difference and really being brave about it. That's where we start to get to the differences of opinion being welcomed at the table. So from a business perspective, that really drives different, stronger decisions, different decisions, because the journey to get there is harder, and it is hard work. When Luz was talking before about these different levels, I was thinking of the cultural assessment I use, the IDI, Intercultural Development Inventory. They also have 5 levels, going from denial to adaptation, and thinking about where you are and where you think you are. That's a piece of that philosophy, but it kind of comes back to that, what is your lived experience and your learning, but also what are you willing to share of yourself? So I think all of these pieces are important for anyone to consider as they evolve in understanding their CQ and EQ.
Thanks for that. I'm listening to your conversation, Janine, about those 5 steps and whatnot, and all of us talking about introspection. But as I was doing some research into this topic, or these topics, if you will, and for me, I'm like, a fan of Adam Grant, and Adam Grant, the organizational psychologist out of I forget which university it is now, but one of the things that he talked about in his book, Think Again, and he's written in the past about where he's had a problem with emotional intelligence, and it has to do with control. I know in one of his blogs he referred to some leaders who use it as control and use it as something to change the narrative, and it's not really emotionally intelligent, really. I mean, it's just it has a dark side, and they rob us of capacities of reason. So for anyone, I mean, Luz, you're the one who really hones in on emotional intelligence. So what would you say to Adam Grant about this? And for the both of you, what would you say to him about that as well? So that's something I'm curious to hear.
I thought that was an interesting statement, because with anything, you can have a level of manipulation. So for example, I could offer you a cup of water. Am I offering you the cup of water because I think you're thirsty and you might want some? Or am I offering you a cup of water so that you can see that I'm on your side, you can start to like me, and I can start to get some favors, or maybe this could be transactional. Now you owe me something. So there's an urgency and importance when you're really looking into emotional awareness and intelligence as to where is your intention. And people don't know what your intention are, but you can when you start to tap in to your body. And that's where the physical sensations come into play that I mentioned to you. There was a situation, for example, I was in a conference, and it was an emotional conference where people were, sharing personal stories. And the lady beside me starts bawling like, and I start like, hello, is nobody here going to stop this to address what's going on with this individual? And so I decided, let me go through my own process. So let me scan my body. How am I feeling right now? And I knew that I was feeling this heaviness in my chest, and it was due to her exhibition of emotion. And I realized if I'm feeling something uncomfortable, physically uncomfortable, then that means it's more about me. There's something in my thought process. It's not so much about her, but it's more about me. And I realized perhaps I'm uncomfortable and I want her to stop so I can be comfortable. So I allowed the process to go through me, and she had her process. Later on, she stood up and thanked the group for allowing her to purge in this safe environment, because I would have interrupted that process. So this is where the self-awareness comes into play. This is where I have to see, where's my intention? Was it a manipulative move? Because, we can hold our tongue when it's to our boss, but can we hold our tongue when it's our loved one? So you see what I'm saying? There's different intentions that we hold, and we are the ones who have to be aware of our own intention. Am I manipulating in this moment, or am I really being emotionally aware as to what my intentions are? And so that's my response to the comment that you mentioned earlier. In a sense, is it something that can be used for harm? When someone can be charming or shapeshifter, or they shift their language and it's very transactional, connect to yourself. What is your intuition telling you? What's your gut saying? Pause. I'm a big advocate for pausing and breathing, and then feeling inside, how do I want to move forward with this relationship?
Can I just jump in there, Andre?
Yeah, go ahead,
Is that all right? It's just, I've got on my wall here a little Post-it note. So I'm just going to reach across, and it's this on it, right? 90-second pause is the difference between a reaction and a response. So I'm pretty sure you probably come across this before. Yeah, 90-second pause is the difference between a reaction and a response. And I absolutely, I hear everything that Luz has just said, and I'm sure Janine would agree that actually cultural intelligence as well can be used. It can be used in a manipulative way. It's absolutely about the intention of the person, and there's nothing like there's any tool like a pen. A pen is that, they say pen is a powerful weapon, right? In terms of when you're writing something, but actually it could like physically be used to stab somebody. So it's about the person and their intentions and the way that they want to impact, because cultural intelligence as well can be, someone who knows how to use it can use it to manipulate if they want. And we've got to, there's nothing we can do about that. We can only control what we can control in terms of the way that we share our understanding about how people behave, how it can be used, how its benefits have been shown to bring about inclusion, etc. I don't think we should stop sharing these ideas because they can be manipulated and used. I mean, ill-intentioned people the world over will find ill intention, regardless of whether it's emotional intelligence, cultural intelligence, or anything else. Manipulative people are manipulative people, I'm sorry to say.
Yeah, I hear you, Marsha and Luz. I love your approach as well. And the pause, right? The idea that you don't need to react. You can be silent. Silent is acceptance of waiting. When I think of this idea of manipulation, I think of how can we skill everyone to understand cultural intelligence? Because when we can increase the skill in more people in these groups that are underrepresented, in the groups that don't have access, that's where we can give them back the control and the power. So the concept of just really opening up the door of the skills that we need, that we know can work, that's empowering, right? It's accessibility that creates equity of access to things, right? To really navigate rooms. Because as an individual, and you're walking into a business room or into a job or wherever you need to get something, evaluating before you go in, what are the things I need today? What is it that I need to make me feel good, right? To open up your feeling of, I'm content. And it's not that we all win every time, right? We all get a little bit of something we want, but the idea that we are navigating that negotiation into each room, into each situation, and really identifying if we're being manipulated, right? Not that we can fix it each time, but really just turning that around to say, I'm not going to participate in this, right? I'm going to have my 90-second pause, find that tool that's going to slow it down so that you can take back more control and really shift that. So I think of it as, yes, it's a tool that can be manipulated, but it also goes both ways. We can also take back the control to use this tool as an influencer to get what we need as well and make it better for everyone in the room. Right? We all talk about the woman who's spoken over in a meeting, right? The person who has less access to the room because they're not physically there. We talk about these inequities and we talk about allyship of how we can really support someone in a room versus speaking for them. These are the things we can do with emotional intelligence. So maybe you see someone in the room who's unable to navigate it and you see them constantly being shut down and you see them walking away with a emotional feeling of they look like they're going to cry when they leave the room. What are we doing to help them? So I think of it as if there's a groundswelling that's possible with using this tool more often, with more awareness. And that's our opportunity as practitioners of this, is to share more.
I love that. I love that so much. I just think that that's such a great perspective. I'm sure you agree, Luz, that, just being able to be, bring that sense of the more people who know, the more people who have power is just absolutely brilliant. I love that. I'm going to take that. Stealing that one.
Love it. I'm going to 90 seconds.
I would love to add to that. The reason why, and I don't know about Marsha and Janine, but the reason why I have this information is because I had the privilege of having a relationship where he paid for all the bills. And because he paid all the bills, I had the time and opportunity to take courses. And I know that there's a lot of pay inequity. And because there's pay inequity, people are struggling still just to have food on the table, pay the rent, have their mortgage, have heating in the northern states. And when we have that privilege of learning more information, I think if you can teach it, spread it, support others, it's so valuable. Exactly what you said, Janine. Spread this information, educate others, and help them learn how it's like a combination, right? How to get that little internal combination to align perfectly so you could start learning that insight for yourself. How can you start changing your perspective? How can you see the light at the end of the tunnel? I created something called the 50-30-20 rule for emotional intelligence. And I played off of the budget 50-30-20 rule for budgeting. But basically it means for 50 seconds, can you pause and see the opportunity in something? And then for 30 seconds, can you give gratitude? And then for 20 seconds, can you pause and breathe? So if you know that you're in a situation where you're triggered, usually you can't find anything to be grateful for. And that will start helping you shift. So what am I grateful for? Where is the opportunity? Where is the lesson for me? And this will start guiding you on a step to seeing differently, gaining a different perspective.
There's a great book by, I don't know if you know it, by Nathan Fern Suzanne called The Upside of Uncertainty. And it's very much about that sort of when you're uncertain, when you're feeling like you don't know what's going to come next, you feel stressed, and I think when that sort of stress and pressure builds up, you kind of get into these spiraling moments, but trying to reframe and reposition and taking those 100 seconds sounds like a really good way of being able to find the possibility and the upside in uncertainty as well. So great tips.
This conversation has just been quite powerful in recognizing for me in terms of emotional intelligence really being at the core, and having that self-awareness and being able to spread that is so key. But in that vein, when we're talking about spreading that and educating other people, which is so powerful, just taking it for like our local and global organizations, we recognize that they're becoming, more multicultural, and they're becoming more diverse in terms of talent and skills. How can we take, how can leaders take that in terms of learning cultural intelligence and taking that and moving forward with that? How can they use that for learning?
Yeah, Priya, if I can jump in there, because I'm currently in a situation where 80% of the company is outside the US and 20% is in the US. And being an American, right, I'm navigating across all of that. So if you can ground it in a tool or any assessment that starts off with this is the current state of your team or the organization, it opens the door to understanding those other cultures. So I do think CQ at local and global, because it focuses on all the differences and all your cultural experience, it naturally opens up to getting to know other people. So instead of doing like a DISC assessment or at least strengths or personalities, this is an area where it's like, wow, we can all really be more comfortable sharing our differences in this way and really talking through that, because no matter where you are, it's acceptable, right? There's no right or wrong answer about it. But then taking that tool to say, wow, my difference here in one country to your difference, we can actually talk about that. So one of the tools I use is storytelling through podcasts at my company to really facilitate that and uphold each difference in every place. So it's a goal of mine to uphold that. I think CQ can certainly help with that and beginning that journey and kind of pulling it around, because in some countries we don't talk about it at all. Some countries we still debate what the word race means, right? But talking about the cultural differences and nuances of what these words mean across the world, that is the conversation. It's not to say your definition's wrong and mine is wrong. They're all right. When I get into the Latinx population, Latina, Latino, Hispanic, all of the definitions are right, and upholding and acknowledging all of them is important. But the debate, it's a distraction. It's a distraction of just saying we have different communities that are constantly evolving, and all of these terms are welcome, right? Even in the LGBTQ plus community, all of the terms are welcome, yet we're constantly seeing pushback of why are there more? And it's why not? Why not? That is really what we have today, is a changing demographic around the world. So that's my perspective on it, is the deepening and expanding these definitions is a positive thing, but we have to get that skill set of CQ to talk about it and embrace it differently.
What do you think, Marsha, in terms of what would help in terms of leaders learning about CQ and what CQ is?
I think it's coming back to that idea that, the language of CQ is not confrontational, but the level of introspection can be uncomfortable, and just being able to have a conversation where if you recognize across like the last, I don't know how many decades, there's all this research that shows if you have an inclusive culture in your organization, you'll be more profitable, your staff engagement will go up, you'll be more innovative. If you've got that, all the diverse perspectives and an inclusive culture, you have to bring those two things together, and you'll create those equitable outcomes with these other business outcomes. And when it comes to leaders of organizations who basically want a better bottom line, it comes down to the fact that actually this isn't about EDI, this isn't about emotional intelligence, this isn't about cultural intelligence, it's about better organizational effectiveness and ultimately better business performance. And when you spend the time and the money and the effort and give the agency and resource to those who have the expertise, it's proven, all the data shows that if you're willing to lean into the discomfort that the culture change can bring, everything just works. Profitability, staff engagement, innovation, happiness indexes, all of these things, that inclusion narrative around the organization just is improved. But it takes effort, it takes consciousness around the behavior, it takes that self-awareness, and ultimately it benefits all. So I always end up saying, well, why wouldn't you, rather than why would you?
For me, I'd like to jump in there. You said it, Marsha. It's about paying the experts to come in and implement these strategies. And it is training. I recently did a training on mentorship for an organization in Oregon. And we were talking about active listening. And there was examples of how they're not active listening. Everyone can rate themselves as a high active listener, but how many times have you left the conversation in your mind? How many times did you remind yourself, oh, I got to get back in? What did they just say? And then your mind backtracks to the last couple of words they said. And you're like, yeah, I'm present, I'm here. But are you truly present? So for an organization to really implement these strategies, it has to be embedded. So DEI is a great add-on, but it has to be truly part of the culture. We really care about what you're saying. We want to hear what you're saying. We're teaching feedback. We're teaching communication skills. We're teaching about diverse cultures. There was an organization who didn't want to deal with a specific organization because they were Chinese. And they were saying, they're always trying to cut my prices. And I said, well, if you look at the culture, that's their style. That's a style of negotiating. And you have another style of negotiating. So why don't you come to the table and start learning more about who they are as an entity, a group, an organization, and see how you work together best. It's not about cutting off people. And I think that's one of the biggest issues that we have. If we don't know how to communicate with someone, we detach. And it's all about connecting. And connecting as equals, not as higher than or lower than, but it's truly an art to see someone else and value them and see how I can bring them value, they can bring me value, and how it's really a win-win. So people talk a lot about that, but I think the how is missing. And that's where bringing in the right experts to come in to talk about it comes in.
And Liz, if I can jump in too, and Marsha, I think the other piece of this is that some of these things have ratings where you're self-assessing yourself. And that's the hard part where the experts can help, because they can really interpret what's happening with all the players in the room and give honest, constructive criticism by observations. Because at the end of the day, we all have work to do. And we need to have a plan of accountability of how we're going to move forward to advance. And it's not that we're going to have it perfect today or in 3 months, but if we don't have an honest look of the work that we can do, as individuals across the board, that's where it's not going to shift. So it's great if you can bring in and do some of these assessments. And if everyone checks the box and says, I did it, I know everything about this now and I'm doing it. But then where's the measurement come in? Where does the measurement come in of what your progress is? Because it's not that you get it right in day 2. It's that you make progress over months and years, and we check in with each other and say, honestly, how are we doing? Right? It's your health checkup at your doctor. How am I really doing? Am I really meeting all the goals I need to be the healthiest person I can be? And the answer is not always what you want. But that's a hard check-in moment. And without accountability, these tools, they're going to sit there and be tools on the shelf, a book on the shelf. So that's the other piece of the challenge here, is how do we get change to occur over time?
I just want to sort of just quickly say that, Luz, in response to your active listening piece, I want to ensure you that at no point during this conversation have I ever tuned out. I've been constantly actively listening the whole time. Promise.
You just had to prove that.
We're witnessing, we're seeing us, Marsha,
Students
don't
and
worry.
activists.
I just wanted to just quickly go back to the point around really embedding this into the culture of an organization, and really having that piece there, and that it's part of the culture. And just going back to that, when we're talking about organizations and we're talking about companies, when we're talking whether it's local or whether it's global. And, we've had the conversation about the importance about EQ and how that is really at the core. We've talked a lot about self-awareness, and we've talked a lot about having that piece be really important and very present. But should leaders have the capacity, when we're talking about EQ and CQ, should they have the capacity to learn both of those?
If I can go say yes.
Yeah,
like I'm sure, I'm sure
Janine,
Janine, and I mean, there's, yes. And it's never either or, it's always this and. Why would you close yourself off from an opportunity to learn and develop? And also, the culture of it's something from Gruner and Whitaker wrote in 2015 in their book, School Culture Rewired. The culture of any organization is shaped by the worst behaviors leaders are willing to tolerate. Well, I'd like to flip that and say the culture of any organization can be shaped by the best behaviors leaders are willing to demonstrate. So how do you demonstrate those behaviors? What are those behaviors? Well, it starts with that self-awareness piece, of course, like Luz has described, but also, as Janine says, you can, with both of the EQ and CQ assessments, you can, pinpoint where you are individually. But when you're shaping a culture as a leadership team, how you embed those into your policies, procedures, and practices is about behaviors and discipline. So it's a combination of having the role modeling, making sure everyone understands why you want to behave inclusively, making sure the training's in place, but importantly, those supportive formal mechanisms, how you do your recruitment, your procurement, your HR policies, they all have inclusivity baked into them from that point of view of understanding that, individuals are as diverse as there are, multiples of them on the planet. Leadership needs to step up and take responsibility and acknowledge actually they don't know everything. And there is an opportunity always to learn and grow. And the best leaders learn and grow constantly throughout their careers.
If I could jump in, I'd like to say 3 points. Number one, not all leaders lead from the front. We have this assumption that the leader has to be the mouthpiece, the leader, the visionary, everything. But if you really look at Steve Jobs, he knew how to see someone's brilliance and put them in the right position, just like Tim Cook, for example. And so with that being said, I've been brought into organizations as an EQ facilitator and coach. I come in with problem VPs, give them some EQ assessments and coaching and language strategies around their language and how they speak with other people. So there might be emotional awareness, emotional intelligence, but how about the self-regulation part? I've dealt with individuals who know that they're being offended, but and then they don't know how to regulate that behavior. And then how do you intermingle that with all these diverse individuals in an organization? So I agree with Marsha that it's a tandem. It's not like it's one over the other. Body language is part of it, tone of voice, all of these play a part in relationship building and in discovering unconscious biases. If I'm ready to discover how I interact with you, how my past experiences come into play in this space, and people say my truth, but I realize it's not my truth, it's my experience from a part of me that could have been a filter. And so that could also be in your space, a filtered experience. How do we overcome this with the emotional intelligence and cultural intelligence, and then come together again at an even playing field where we don't want that to mess, like create carnage. We really want to get the most out of people. And so for a leader to help his organization really thrive and have a competitive advantage, it's just beneficial.
Luz, I'll just add like the one other piece here is I love when leaders come to me and ask me for these tools, because it really just shows that open mindset, right? So to me, I'm leading from behind too. It's saying, okay, here's what I would do. You open, and then I'll jump in. I'll jump in with the skill and walking it through. But then I do want you to jump up and reaffirm the behaviors, right? And be vulnerable. Their vulnerability is the piece where that's the opener and the grow moment. So that's the best way, but we know we don't always have that. So moving to company values and what the aspirations are and those goals of a company, that can also help navigate all this. So all of this comes with it, with open mindsets to embrace this and be open to change. That's really where we're all going to grow. So I love it when I hear people asking for what else can we do? What else can we learn? What can we get to know of each other to make it more impactful? And I think that's where CQ and EQ, they can really shine with those leaders, really just being willing to be vulnerable.
Yeah, and I'm hearing this, and just before we close, it reminded me of a situation recently where, I raised the fact that we need to start thinking about cultural intelligence in a bureaucratic public sector organization, and they're, a lot of them are, as within those areas, it's just they're very resistant to change, want to remain with the status quo, and cultural intelligence is not even something that's there, even though they serve a population of millions of people, millions of different cultures, and not fully understanding, especially given the fact that in Canada there's a plan to have I believe it's like 5 million new immigrants to the country in the next 10 years or something. So it's understanding those cultures and incorporating them into the organization and having them feel comfortable, but also having the vulnerability to feel uncomfortable in the sense that you're learning about them and not being taken aback by their differences in a handshake or their speech or et cetera. So like you said, Luz, it's not about necessarily about the title of having a leader or leading from the front. People can lead from the back, and it's not even just about that. It's just more about taking that responsibility, and that's where we're learning about this. And now that we can tack on cultural intelligence to this conversation, and I appreciate all that's been said today, and what, I've learned a lot from all of you, and I can speak on behalf of Priya for that as well. So thank you for this conversation. It was really great. And I just want to close by just finding out, where people can find you. So Marsha, where can people find you?
So I'm on LinkedIn at Marsha Ramroop and unheardvoice.co.uk.
And Janine?
Janine Ting-Jansen. You can find me on LinkedIn. Use all three names to find me. And I'm really happy to connect and share any of these learnings. Thank you.
And Luz.
I'm also on LinkedIn. You could find me Luz Gonzalez, Luz-EQ Refined. And I'm also on Instagram, EQ with Luz, Luz. And my website, eqrefined.com.
All right, that's a wrap, and I appreciate all that's been discussed today. And thanks again, everyone.
Thanks, Andre.
Right.
Thanks, Marsha, Luz.
Hey, everyone.